They say the land remembers things people have forgotten.
Before the highways, before the towns, before the names we gave to rivers and hills, something walked here.
Something enormous. There are stories older than any map, stories of beings that shook the earth when they moved, that left footprints deep enough to swallow a man whole.
Stories told by peoples who knew this land far better than we do. Warnings carved into tradition, lessons shaped like giants.
And then the settlers came, and they found the bones, and a country that was already ancient held its breath.
Today, we go looking for the giants of America.
I'm your host, Chloe, and welcome to Whispers of Southern Ohio, a podcast about the strange, the forgotten, and the stories that drift through these hills like fog on a cold morning. Today, we're going deep into the landscape of myth and memory, talking about giants. Giants in Native American traditions, in the accounts of early settlers, in the folklore that shaped this country's identity. To help navigate that territory, I've brought in someone who has spent years living inside these stories. Mark H. Rowe is an author and podcaster whose work explores the edges of history, the strange facts, the persistent legends, and the human need to explain a world that often feels too big to understand. Mark, welcome to Whispers of Southern Ohio.
Thank you, Chloe. This is exactly the kind of conversation I love, where the line between history and legend that's a little blurry.
That blurry line is kind of our home address on this podcast.
Then I'm right where I belong. Giants are one of those subjects where you start pulling on one thread and suddenly realize the whole tapestry of American folklore is woven through with it.
Let's begin at a beginning that predates almost everything most of us learned in school. The very first voices we should listen to are the ones who have been here the longest. Native American traditions across this continent are full of giant figures, and they are not the lumbering monsters of fairy tales.
Not at all. The giants in indigenous traditions are complex. They're moral forces, spiritual weight. Take the stone giants of the Haudenosaunee. These are beings made of stone, massive and almost indestructible, but they represent a dangerous imbalance. Beings who became so powerful, so removed from community, that they could no longer live within it. They're cautionary figures.
So the giant isn't just a creature, it's a lesson.
Exactly. The Cherokee have the Nunahi, supernatural beings of immense power who inhabit the wild places, the mountains, the rivers. And the Lakota have the Unctehi, great water serpents who once clashed with the Thunderbirds in ancient cosmic battles. The bones of the Unctehi are often associated with fossil remains, mammoth bones, dinosaur bones. The Lakota looked at those enormous remains in the bluffs along the Missouri and understood them as the bones of the Unctehi.
Which is a completely logical conclusion if you've never encountered paleontology.
Completely logical, and in a way accurate. Those are the bones of creatures that once ruled this world. The Lakota weren't wrong, they just had a different vocabulary for what they were seeing, a vocabulary connected to how they understood their relationship with the land.
So these giant stories weren't just entertainment, they were making the landscape sacred.
In many traditions, giant beings explain the geography itself. Why does this valley exist? Because a giant lay down here. Why is this river so powerful? Because a great serpent still sleeps beneath it. You can't separate yourself from a landscape you understand as alive and inhabited by memory. That's a profound ecological awareness wearing the clothing of myth.
So we have these rich, ancient traditions, and then the settlers arrive, and suddenly giant stories take on a very different character.
Put yourself in the position of the early European settlers arriving in the Ohio Valley. They encounter a landscape vast beyond anything they've known. The forests are endless, the rivers enormous, the hills are old in a way European hills simply aren't. And then they start finding things they have no framework for. Enormous bones emerging from eroding riverbanks, giant teeth, massive curved tusks, femurs that seem to belong to a creature larger than any living animal they've ever seen.
And they call them giants.
Of course they do. The 18th century newspapers are full of reports of giant human skeletons, 8 feet tall, 9 feet tall, found in burial mounds and along rivers. These reports were printed seriously by serious men because what they were finding was genuinely extraordinary. Mostly, they were finding the bones of Ice Age megafauna, mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths. A mastodon femur is enormous, but if you've never seen a prehistoric elephant, what do you do with what you're looking at?
You reach for the nearest available explanation.
Which, for a biblically literate 18th century settler, was the giants of Genesis. There were giants in the earth in those days. So finding enormous bones in Ohio wasn't impossible, it was confirmation of something they already believed. The settlers weren't lying, they were encountering things that exceeded their understanding and reaching for the closest available framework. The same response the Lakota had when they looked at those same bones along the Missouri. Different vocabulary, same fundamental awe.
Both groups standing in front of something ancient and enormous, trying to make sense of it.
And both groups produced stories that outlasted the people who told them.
Let's talk about the mounds. For listeners in Ohio, this is personal. The Great Serpent Mound, the Hopewell Earthworks, these are astonishing structures. And for a long time, there was this idea that ordinary people couldn't have built them.
The myth of the mound builders, one of the most consequential myths in American history. By the early 19th century, thousands of documented earthen mounds stretched across the Ohio Valley. The Hopewell and Adena cultures built them over centuries, beginning roughly 2,000 years ago, geometrically precise, some of them enormous. And the prevailing settler response was, there is no way the ancestors of the people currently living here built this. This must have been someone else.
And that someone else became giants.
Or a lost white race, or Israelites. Congress commissioned a report on the subject, serious scholars tasked with figuring out who built the mounds, and the eventual scientific conclusion was that the mounds were built by the ancestors of the indigenous peoples of North America, by the Hopewell and Adena cultures and their descendants, people working together, generation after generation, in a feat of communal labor that is a genuine achievement of the ancient world.
And yet the myth persisted.
Because it was never really about the mounds. It was about denial, refusing to credit indigenous peoples with the sophistication those earthenworks represent. If you could convince yourself they were built by a lost race of giants, you didn't have to reckon with what had been destroyed when those peoples were displaced. The giant builder myth was doing political work, and that work was erasure.
A hard truth sitting inside what looks like a simple folk legend.
The folk legends that last are almost always doing hard work. They're carrying something. And that one was carrying the weight of a country that didn't want to face what it had done.
Not all giant stories are doing that kind of dark work, though. Some of them are, and I mean this sincerely, just pure American joy. Paul Bunyan.
Paul Bunyan. So big that when he was born, it took 5 storks to deliver him. His footprints became the Great Lakes. He carved the Grand Canyon by dragging his axe behind him. And he has a giant blue ox named Babe, who is by some measures even more impressive than Paul himself.
He shapes the entire American landscape just by being in it.
He's the spirit of American ambition, made enormous. The frontier belief that human will can reshape the physical world. He's not alone. Pecos Bill, Stormalong, John Henry, who is maybe the most American of all. A man so powerful he challenges a machine and wins and dies. A whole tradition of tall-tale heroes whose exaggerated size is a way of processing the enormity of the American experience. How do you make sense of the Mississippi, the Rockies, the Great Plains, forests where individual trees are older than Western civilization? You imagine beings large enough to be at home in it.
And then the stories travel. From logging camps in Minnesota to riverboats on the Ohio. By the time Paul Bunyan reaches Appalachia, he sounds a little different, a little more holler than lumber camp.
That's how folklore works. It's alive. Folk stories change because the people telling them are changing. And giant stories have this incredible adaptability because the thing they're really about, the encounter with something larger than yourself, is universal.
Why giants? Of all the mythological figures available to human imagination, why does every culture seem to need one?
Giants are how we tell stories about things too big to fit inside a single human life. A flood that changes the course of a river,
a drought that lasts for generations, the slow disappearance of a forest your great-grandparents played in, the loss of a people, a language, a way of life. These things have no single face. Stories about giants, beings whose footsteps can dam a river, whose anger can uproot a forest, give us a language for forces that are otherwise nameless.
Giants as a way of narrating change.
Giants as grief wearing stone armor. When a tribe tells a story about a giant who flattened the valley, they may be encoding the memory of a catastrophic flood. When settlers talk about giant bones in the earth, they're partly processing the terror of a world older and stranger than their traditions prepared them for. The legend scales the catastrophe. It makes the incomprehensible comprehensible, and it preserves the memory in a form people will actually tell each other. Nobody sits around a fire and says, "Let me tell you about the gradual erosion of the riverbank over 3 centuries." But they will tell you about the Umtehi.
That's beautiful, and also a little heartbreaking.
Most of the best stories are.
How do researchers approach giant myths today?
The field has changed significantly. There was a long period where the dominant academic posture toward folklore was essentially debunking. Identify the legend, explain the misidentification, consider the matter closed. What's replaced that, in the most interesting corners of anthropology and folklorics, is a more generative question. Not, is this literally true, but what is this story doing? What function is it serving? What does it encode? What does it preserve?
And when you ask those questions of giant stories,
you find them doing an enormous amount of work. Ethnobotanists have found that certain giant stories encode genuine ecological knowledge. Geographers have traced legends to areas of significant flooding or seismic activity. The giant explains the changed landscape. Linguists have found that the persistence of monster legends often tracks the borders of ancient tribal territories. The legend as archive. These stories aren't failured science, they're a different kind of science, one that prioritizes transmission and meaning over measurement. And for tens of thousands of years, they worked extraordinarily well.
The people who told these stories were paying very close attention to their world.
Closer attention than most of us manage today. It's pattern recognition, it's meaning-making, the oldest human technology, and it's still running.
Let's pull back. We've traveled from the stone giants of the Haudenosaunee to mastodon bones on the Ohio River to Paul Bunyan's blue ox. Sitting here in southern Ohio hills, I keep asking, what does it mean that these stories persist?
It means we need them, still, even now. We live in a world that prizes measurement and explanation, but that leaves a gap, a place in the psyche where the unexplained should be. Giant stories fill that gap.
And there's something particular about Appalachia in all of this. This region, the fog in the hollows, the hills that fold in on themselves, the rivers that flood and change and flood again. It's a landscape that generates mystery almost involuntarily.
Appalachia is old in a way that gets under your skin. These mountains are among the oldest ranges on Earth, worn down by time until they're round and forest-covered, and they look deeply knowing. Like they've seen everything that has ever happened here, and they remember all of it. And the people who've lived here for generations carry that same quality, a willingness to take the unexplained seriously, without needing to resolve it. You'll hear people in these hills describe something strange with the same matter-of-fact tone they'd use to describe the weather.
Not claiming to know what it was, just reporting what they saw. And that tradition connects directly to the giant legends, to the old stories about what walked here before.
It's a continuous thread. The Cherokee had their giant stories. The early Scots-Irish settlers brought their own traditions of enormous supernatural beings from the British Isles. Those traditions met in these hollows. They borrowed from each other. They adapted to the specific landscape of southern Ohio and eastern Kentucky and western Virginia, and they produced something new, an Appalachian mythology that is uniquely American.
And it feeds forward into the YouTube channels, the amateur archaeologists walking the riverbanks, the hikers who photograph strange rock formations and wonder, could something have made this?
The impulse never goes away because the need it's addressing never goes away. Human beings are small, the world is large, and we have always needed stories about beings whose size matches the scale of what we're trying to understand.
Maybe we don't need the giants to be real to need the stories to be true.
The best folk stories aren't true in the sense that they happened. They're true in the sense that they mean something. They carry something real inside them, even when the surface is fantastical. And the giant stories of America carry something real about the age of this continent, about the encounter between peoples and traditions, about the human need to stand in front of something enormous and find a way to make sense of it.
Mark, this has been one of the richest conversations I've had on this podcast. Thank you for wandering into these hills with me today.
It's been a genuine pleasure, Chloe. Thank you for asking the questions that mattered. Thank you for joining me on Whispers of Southern Ohio. If you'd like to explore more of my work, you can follow me on my Amazon author page at amazon.com/author/Mark H. Rowe and visit me at markhrowe.com for more stories, books, and updates. Until next time, keep your lantern close and your curiosity closer.